Okay, thank you. So, start the last session of the day, but hopefully what this will do is bring everything full circle back. So session 4 is protecting at-risk groups from CO exposure. So we started off with likes of diagnosis, therapeutics, everything else, but what we're coming back to now, what are the risks and the measures? So what, when we say low-level CO, how much it is. We hit a little bit from Bethel or Carol for Beth, but we're now going to go into a bit more detail, hopefully. So the next talker is Hilary Waring. And she's going to be talking about wrong glasses. It's been a long day, too many coffees, but never mind. The effects of CO poisoning in pregnancy and upon the unborn child. Now, Hilary is the director of IPIP, so it's a consortium of public health practitioners, which hosts the Tobacco Control Collaborating Centre and the Environmental Health Collaborating Centre. You can tell she's a busy person. She has a background in health services research and management, as well as a clinical background in a general nursing, midwifery, and health visiting. Hilary's main areas of interest are developing the wider public health workforce and supporting organisations to implement evidence-based practice and improving performance in practice. Hilary is particularly interested in using an asset-based approach to the development of public health initiatives and in gaining and maintaining compliance with public health policies and legislations. So I'll let Hilary now talk, and I'll stop there, and start the presentation.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to talk about sea exposure during pregnancy. I'm not going to present any data today, even though I'm very much involved in research around this area at the moment. I want to tell us the story of the services and the women and the unborn children that I work with, and my concerns for them, and how what we've heard today already can help potentially to better protect them. So, what do we know? What do we know about the harm? We know that carbon monoxide exposure during pregnancy can cause low birth weight, preterm delivery. It can actually cause sudden infant death. Just because a baby is born alive does not mean that they will survive their first year, and they're more likely not to if they've had exposure to high levels of carbon monoxide during the pregnancy. And it also causes neurodevelopmental problems. How do we know that the babies are exposed? Well, we've heard quite a bit from the academics today about the symptoms of carbon monoxide. Well, for those of you who've either been pregnant or know somebody who's been pregnant, think about the symptoms. Fatigue, tiredness, dizziness, nausea. They're the symptoms of pregnancy, particularly early pregnancy. So they can be, carbon monoxide exposure can be masked. They're also the signs and symptoms of poverty. People living in poverty are quite often accepting of suboptimal health. There's an expectation when you're struggling in life that you don't feel well, that you're tired all the time. It's hard work. So there's lots of different reasons why those symptoms may not be considered to be a sign of exposure to carbon monoxide. And if that baby is exposed in utero, it's going to be exposed when it's born as well. That exposure is not just going to end because the pregnant woman has given birth. They're going to go home to an environment where they continue to be damaged. All women, and I say this, all women in England should have a carbon monoxide breath test at least at the beginning of their pregnancy and at 36 weeks of pregnancy. But it's not because we're worried about environmental CO. We need to help women have an honest conversation about so CO levels in breath is taken as a sign that that person may either be exposed to secondhand smoke or may be smoking themselves. And it's how I came to this area. I was concerned about developing guidance in this area and implementing it. And back in 2010, 11, 12, we weren't even thinking vaguely about carbon monoxide from any other source. We just thought if you had a raised CO, you must be a smoker. And if you said you weren't, then you weren't telling the truth. It's just that you couldn't disclosure to make. Now no differently. But we're testing the pregnant woman's breath. And that does not give a true indication of the level within the unborn child. Those levels in the unborn baby go to higher levels and stay in their system longer. So even when we identify environmental CO exposure, that pregnant woman may not necessarily get the right treatment that will actually reduce harm to that unborn child. Also, that breath test is taken in a hospital environment or a clinic environment, almost to a person. So they could have been out all day. They could have been to the shops. They could have dropped the kids off at school. They could have been at the mum's. So by the time the midwife sees them, with a 4-hour half-life, how accurate is that reading? And when it is raised, we think, oh, there must be a smoker. Do you smoke? Yeah. So all of that CO must be down to being a smoker. We don't think that some of that CO may be because of their smoke exposure to tobacco smoke, but maybe part of it might be because of environmental issues. A woman in this country can go through the whole of her pregnancy and not have any visit at home at the moment. So we're not seeing the home environment. We're seeing them outside the home and sometimes after a long period. So, what do we know about the impact? How many babies are actually impacted by this? Well, in the UK, we have 650,000 births around a year. And we have almost 5,000 perinatal deaths. And about 1,500 of those, we don't have a reason for that death. And do we look at carbon monoxide? Do the medical examiners look at this as a reason? No, we don't. It's not something that is readily considered as being a cause of one of those. And we don't look at all for those babies who are damaged but don't die from it. Who? I know everybody tells me when I came to work in this area that anybody and everybody can be exposed to carbon monoxide. Totally agree. It can happen to all of us. But I'm most concerned about the most vulnerable women, those living in poverty, those who are most disadvantaged, those who have least opportunity to impact the environment they're living in and to protect themselves. Some of you may have been at the meeting when the CoMed group actually released their report. And Izzy's smiling because she most likely remembers what happened. An MP said to me, but it's only 20 quid for an alarm. Only 20 quid? Really? That's a week's food budget for many. That's a week's food budget. That's a lot of money. So only those of us that can afford it think it's only. It's not easy to spend it. And when you don't perhaps understand the benefit of it, why would you risk that income on something you're not sure is going to make any difference? So they're the ones that I'm most concerned about. And at what level are we looking? You know, what level is it that we're really concerned about? We've got the WHO guidance, haven't we? But is anybody exposed on the whole for a total period of time at those levels? Because we open doors and we open windows and we move around our homes. And if we look at how alarms work at the moment, there isn't much chance. It's got to be really bad before the alarm goes off. And what midwives and obstetricians say to me and women say to me is, but my alarm hasn't gone off. Well, that's telling you to get out, you might die. It's not telling you that you're living in an environment where day by day, chronically, you and your baby are being damaged. And that your baby, if it's born alive, may actually have a neurological deficit because of that. So alarms are great, but they can actually make you feel safe when you should not feel safe. And I think we have situations in our communities, and I think it's increasing with fuel poverty at the moment, where we have families that are certainly not safe because they're not able to protect themselves, and they may be in situations where those who own those premises are not protecting them either. I'm going to give you a little bit of Amy's story. And Amy, we've named her Amy, is a young woman we met as part of our work in gaining insights and doing work that's about co-designing solutions to health problems. This is Amy. Amy smokes. Amy's 17. She's pregnant. She's been living in a house of multiple occupations, so she's just in a bedroom. In that bedroom, in fact, is a cupboard, and that's got the boiler in it. And in her room is no CO alarm. Or in the corridor outside. She doesn't go into the kitchen because she's frightened to go into the kitchen because she's scared of the other people she's living with in the house. Doesn't know them, doesn't feel safe. So she's using a gas stove, a camping gas stove in her room. And she will have had a CO test, but because she smokes, any raised levels will have been put down to smoking. She's got lots of professionals going in. She's got the baby social worker, her social worker, her family nurse, a midwife. I mean, there is an array of professionals going in there. But does anybody think carbon monoxide and pregnancy and the harm that might be happening? Nobody knows to even think about it. There's no training at the moment around environmental carbon monoxide exposure for midwives or social workers or for family nurses or for social housing providers. So everybody maybe thinks about the smoking. Nobody thinks about the environmental exposure for Amy. We've got to make that better. And there are mechanisms that we can use, but we don't. So, call to action for me. We've got to better understand environmental CO exposure in pregnancy. This is the beginning of life. And if we get it wrong, that child, that adult will be living with that for the next, well, hopefully 80, 90 years. But they'll be living with the deficit that's happened during that pregnancy, that's been caused during that pregnancy. We need to understand the barriers and facilitators to identification. How do we recognise those babies who are in danger and protect them? Where are our pathways and protocols and interventions around identification, treatment and the removal of that harm? Where is the training for the midwives and other healthcare staff so that they understand the risk and understand what to look for and how to identify it? Nice guidance has just come out around tobacco control, the end of last year, but it actually mentions environmental CO, and it suggests that midwives should help women identify where they might be exposed. But where's the training for that? No recommendation for training for healthcare staff. So we need to get better at identification and at treatment, but we need to get better at actually raising the issues with our health professionals. We've got a study on the go at the moment, so there will be data, just not this year. We are at the moment working in 4 parts of the country with fire and rescue services and maternity services. We've got one set here from Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital and Coventry Fire and Rescue Service, where actually going into women's homes and monitoring their exposure and looking at their situations. and FRS are undertaking those visits. And we're also talking to women. We're having insightful conversations to understand where the risks are and how they can help better protect themselves and how we can help them. We're also undertaking a literature review to understand more about the damage and what we know already that we could take action on, and are going to be having a round table to discuss, okay, let's not wait for more research results. Let's do something now. There are things we can do today. So for me today, it's that call to action. What in those things can you help us with? What's your role? I'm not the academic, I'm not the expert in this area, but I do know when you give me the evidence that I work with teams in the communities where we can actually get that evidence into action and make a difference to women's lives. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got time for one question if anybody wants to ask a question to Hilary. Shirley?
Hilary, a little bit of a theoretical question, really. So we've listened, excellent presentation, thank you. We've listened about pregnancy and the effects of CO on the unborn child. It would be interesting to see if the biobank would give you any information on those deaths of children, if they've got that information. But we obviously got children that are being born. We do know that we can pick up behavioural issues, but it would be really helpful to follow through, because the question I have is, could there be, at very low levels, over a period of time, some adaptation of those children that may, when they're born, become more hypersensitive to exposure?
Yeah, I mean, when I was listening to the talk earlier on about once you've been exposed, then you're more, you're more sensitive, I think is a really interesting area, because at the moment we've got no way of understanding how many babies have actually been exposed. I think it's a fascinating area. But I will say, and this is not scientific at the moment, we're looking for funding, but 4 maternity units that I work with actually looked at how many babies had how many women had raised COs in pregnancy, but were not identified as smokers. And it was 7%. They were in areas of deprived communities. And then they went back and looked at birth weight, and that group against the group that had a normal CO had lower birth weights. And I think we need to take a much more scientific look at that, because I think that's an indicator that we may have a whole cohort of babies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next speaker is Dr. Julie Connolly, who's going to talk about the lived experience of those exposed to CO. Now, unfortunately, Julie can't make it for us, but she sent a video. So Julie is a senior lecturer in allied nursing at Liverpool John Moores University, the Faculty of Health. And she recently completed a PhD that was supported in those days by the Gas Safety Trust, looking at the lived experience. She's talking through and doing some... I can't even get my teeth right. So phenomenology, you'll find out in a minute when she talks about it, aspects of victims
I'm very
of
sorry
CO.
I can't be with you,
So
and
hopefully
you've had
the video
a
will
great
start.
day so far, and thank you very much for the invitation. So this is the lived experience of those exposed to carbon monoxide, and my name is Julie Connolly, and I'll be mainly talking to you about 2 studies that we've got going at the moment. That's one with Irish Community Care and one with Bella Sandler's Retreat over here. So my research initially in carbon monoxide was about is qualitative research, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to tell you more about qualitative research on the next slide. But I looked at how people cope with exposure to carbon monoxide, because there wasn't any accounts of people's lived experience. We had medical accounts of people treating people who'd been exposed, but we didn't have their own accounts of what it was like to be exposed to carbon monoxide. So because we had no knowledge of it, that was the gap in the literature. We talked to people from lots of backgrounds, you know, and sort of different ages, experiences of CO, different effects, you know, all sorts of differences. The only thing they had in common was that they'd all been exposed to carbon monoxide. And yeah, and so people, like I say, they haven't had that chance to be heard before, you know, sort of there's some media exposure, sure, and they had excellent support from charities, some of the people I spoke to, but not from an academic point of view. It had not been looked at from an academic point of view. So the two groups that we're looking at have, you know, sort of have been described as seldom heard communities. So I just want to sort of talk about this for a little minute, and just to remind us, othering is where you don't, for whatever reason, fit the dominant sort of cultural discourse or norm or idea in the place where you're living. And intersectionality is where you have maybe a few characteristics that mean you're likely to sort of be othered, as people say. So just for an example, we know that women and men tend to have different experiences of healthcare. So if you're a woman, particularly a young woman, or, you know, and you have, you've already got, say, a diagnosed mental health issue, which is very common, and then you're trying to seek treatment or get diagnosed for CO exposure, you might have a very different experience from someone who doesn't have those characteristics, trying to get that support and help. So yes, so there's plenty of seldom heard communities, and I'm just going to talk about two of them, and I'm just going to talk about how we try and hear them. So yes, I'm just going to let you read these for a second, because you can read them quicker than I can say them. So yes, and I will be explaining terms as we go through. So just a little word about qualitative research first. So it's qualitative when you collect the data in language form, when you do that with people, and it answers questions like why, because you allow them to say it in their own words, so you can explore things much more deeply, which is great when you're looking at something that's as ill-defined as carbon monoxide research, you know, exposure is. It allows us to look at the complexities of that, and allows us to maybe illuminate them and to highlight them, and maybe distill them into points that are more manageable, and helps us understand the context and the environment in which that phenomena is happening. So I talked to some student nurses about carbon monoxide, and one of them shared that she'd been in a situation where she was exposed, but because she was student midwife, sorry, and because she was on nights, she didn't realise that that's why she felt ill. She just thought she felt ill because she was on nights. So that's why she didn't seek any help. She didn't think of seeking any help. So even something that simple can help us understand this bigger picture, and help us understand people's own position of what it's like to be in that situation. And without qualitative research, there's so much we wouldn't know about things like domestic abuse and violence, about things like phantom limb pain, what it's like to live in poverty, how that might affect your health, what treatments work, what treatments don't work, why that might be. So there's loads of things that are, you know, really, really enriched by this sort of research. And you know, it also helps us to look at what to measure, you know, so you can measure attitudes using different sorts of research, you know, that are maybe less time consuming than qualitative research. But if you're not measuring the right things, then you're going to, you know, you're not going to get the right results, or you're not going to find anything out, because you're not using the right things you're not measuring the right things. So yeah, qualitative research is systematic and rigorous, and with quality concepts, just like any other form of research. You know, there's ways of doing it that you need to follow. Okay, so onto the studies themselves. So if we were together, I'd ask you to maybe have a guess and see if there are any that are true or false here, but unfortunately, they are all true. And So Stamp on the Camps was a campaign, it's a while ago now, 2005, but it was but it was a campaign run by a tabloid newspaper in this country. My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, I don't know if you remember that, that was a few years ago too, but it did have an effect on how we see travelling and communities. It was the first exposure really that some of us had to that community. But it was like almost like it's a reality show, so it's not really real. So it's like us watching, like somebody else watching Love Island and making judgments about our society because they think, it was on Love Island, so it must all be like that. So it's not great. This one particular, there was a child removed from her family because she just didn't have the same colouring as her brothers and sisters, and that's what the news report said. It was just, at the time she'd just been taken away. And they never explained the speaks much better English thing, but yeah, she was returned because she just looked like cousins and aunties and uncles rather than like her immediate family. And The Truth About Traveller Crime is a dispatches programme, which you might think would be a little bit more balanced. And of course, there's criminal behaviour in every section of society, but it really wasn't sort of that balanced a programme. It really didn't sort of give you that impression that it was just a minority of travellers who engaged in criminal activities. Okay, so you can see there you've got that sort of that stereotypical feeding into the stereotypes idea. And then moving on to the second study, PTSD, obviously post-traumatic stress disorder. The C in front of it just means chronic. PTSD can become chronic, and unfortunately, sadly, it is common in military veterans. And one of the things that has been shown to help people in that position is ecotherapy or wild living, where literally people go and live in tents or under awnings and, do their cooking and heating with fires. And that's proven to be beneficial because you can see sort of there's 2.5 something million veterans in the UK, and that's an awful lot of them who have mental health problems from combat experiences, and they might also have physical health problems from those experiences too. So they're a section of community it was used to lots of camaraderie and focus in the military life, and now they find that they're having to try and reintegrate into civilian life while they've got these problems. So there are, they tend to be an economically deprived group, and they tend to have problems with depression and alcohol and substance misuse, and they tend to be sort of victims and perpetrators of violent crime, and they tend to have an awful lot of problems. But yes, being close to nature acts as therapy, so it allows veterans to have some respite from the symptoms, some comradeship, and find some purpose by re-engaging with nature. But unfortunately, sort of, there's a worry there, isn't there? Because they're in this natural environment, and they might have symptoms from post-traumatic stress disorder and other injuries. But if they are being exposed to lower levels of CO from the ecotherapy lifestyle, then that might be exacerbating these post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, which is obviously something that we want to address. And there's been studies, we do have information about holiday makers, in camps, who are camping or go caravanning, and there has been accidents reported in those situations, but we don't know anything about people who live in accommodation such as that over a longer time period. Okay, so how we work more closely with small communities is very much sort of taking this participatory action research, nothing about me without me. So they decide what we're going to ask them. They decide how we do the studies. And part of that is exploring what it means to be either misrepresented or seldom heard. But if I'm asking questions such as, tell me what it's like for you, then hopefully that avoids me imposing anything other than just that question and what they're saying. They haven't got to tick a box that doesn't really, doesn't really express what they want to say. You should have the slides. So this link is just, it's a presentation from the NHS about Patient Navigators, who are people who help with this, exploring what it means to be seldom heard, and help people sort of navigate the healthcare system as well. So we've got two teams of people. Irish Community Care are the people who are helping us with the Irish Traveller study, and Wyn Lawler works with them and Susie Hargreaves works with them. So they're brokering those relationships for us, and they're helping us and the community, so we can sort of understand each other, as it were. And then the Ecotherapy Centre, we've got people working on that study too. So this is a picture of Westway. It's not the Liverpool site, but it is a picture of sort of, this is the A40 going into London, and this is the local authority site where travellers have lived for more than 50 years now. So we're just going to investigate whether there are ambient levels of CO within the caravans, and the Liverpool local authority site is quite similar to, quite a similar sort of very urban setting, and it's also quite a deprived area where they are in Liverpool. So the local authority are just the lessors. So as tenants, the travellers are responsible for the make and models of caravan and the gas and the fixtures and fittings that they use to get the gas into their caravans for their heating and their cooking. And there's about 50 residents on the Liverpool site. And we've already talked to them. I've already been and had some conversations with them, and they're very keen to be a part of this. They're very keen to share anecdotal evidence. I found that happens to me a fair amount. They know people, or they've had experiences, or they've heard things, and they want to, they have some experience of issues related to CO. So we want to, using this participatory action research, together with our participants, we want to produce some information that will help other Irish travellers and gypsies and travelling communities to keep safe from CO and the problems. And we're going to hopefully be able to turn this into a larger study, a national study looking at other either settled or roadside travelling communities, where we can look at sort of CO related issues there. Okay, and the second one, the ecotherapy study, again, we're looking at ambient levels of CO, that residents of the ecotherapy retreats might be exposed to. We're going to explore any levels of knowledge, understanding of lower levels of CO, and especially, sort of because they're in the situation of wild living and the effects that this might have on some PTSD. I'm going to give them cameras as well, disposable cameras, and they're hopefully going to be as creative as they want to be. And again, we will produce some appropriate information about CO to help people in this community and other people who are using ecotherapy. So that's it really. So working with hard to reach or hard to help communities such as Irish travellers and veterans with PTSD, and their vulnerabilities to carbon monoxide exposure and what we can do. So we've got people to broker relationships, and we're going to do some participant action research, and hopefully I'll have some results for you soon. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
So if you've got any questions to spend to Julie, then please go through the court website and just she'll pass on information. As you can see, the work she's doing, although it's focusing on the travellers and also on the PTSD armies, it has wider implications to the camping and community. There's actually conversations we were having together that when she's been to the camps before, it's how close they're setting up the fires to the tarps with the wind direction. You can imagine that the CO, certainly when the fire starts to cool down, because they're living in the open atmosphere, they're not going into tents as such. There's outdoor. Now we'd expect a lot of it to diffuse, but there could be potential risks. So that's why it's such a interesting study. But obviously she's coming from two sides. One is the quantitative and one is the qualitative side of it as well, which is a bit different. Okay, I'd like to introduce sort of the next speaker. This is Emma Frazer, who's a Community Safety City Development Officer for London Fire Brigade. And Emma has worked for London Fire Brigade since 2004 within community safety in a variety of roles. And over the last 6 years, Emma has led on water, carbon monoxide and road safety, and is the project manager for the CO and residential boat safety project.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. First of all, I just want to apologise. I've got notes in front of me because I've had a few, I've got migraine the last couple of weeks, so I have slight memory issues. So I just apologise for that in advance. Okay, so let's hope this all works. Yeah, so I'm here to talk to you about the effects of CO exposure on lived-on boats. So I suppose the first question is, what are the effects? What I'm going to say to you is we don't actually know yet. So you're probably now thinking, well, what are you going to talk about for the next 10 minutes? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project that we've been working on at London Fire Brigade for a little longer than we'd first anticipated, and I'll come to that in a moment. So just to give you a bit of background to this, LFB were approached by a group which included the then Gas Safety Trust, so now Court, the Boat Safety Scheme. I think Izzy was there. I think we've had a number of people came to speak to us about whether we would be interested in doing a research project. So to give you some background around it, the houseboat community, the residential boat community, are often very much forgotten, and they're forgotten in our work. They're seen as transient and therefore not necessarily identified as part of the population within London. However, we have over 5,000 boats moored along the canals and waterways within the capital. We attend over 60 incidents to do with boats a year, and that figure, I think, is underrepresented. I think there are actually more underreported, sorry. We're already doing visits to houseboats, but they've been done in more of an ad hoc, not so structured manner. So one of the things when we first talked about this project was like, actually this would be an opportunity to firm that up and to give the proper attention that it deserves. So the perception is actually that, and we've had these conversations in this sort of arena before. The perception is that living on a houseboat, living on a boat, you're more at risk of CO poisoning due to the nature of the boat. It has to be sealed properly to stop the water in to make it float. So therefore, keeping CO in. But is this actually the case, or is this just a perception that we need to look at? So that's the aim of the project. We wanted to answer 4 very key questions. So first of all, and these fulfil the needs for the CO Research Trust, but as well as the information that London Fire Brigade need ourselves. So what are the demographics of those living on residential boats in London? Are they at greater risk of fire due to factors that are currently unknown? Are they at greater risk of carbon monoxide poisoning? And is the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning for houseboat residents seasonal? So are there trends? Is it in the summer? Is it in the winter? Is it at night? Is it in the day? So let's sort of have a look and find out some more information. So what we then decided to do, we have a lot of waterways. We have 102 fire stations across 33 boroughs. Where do we start with this? We can't roll it out for everybody because it's not relevant. Some boroughs in London don't have really any water. They don't have any canal network. So we approached the Canal and River Trust and we got them to do some mappings of moorings, and the colours show the density of moorings. So the orange ones are where you've got more boats, the green ones are where you've got less, very simply. We've got a range of moorings. We've got short-term and long-term. So we have a number of 2-week moorings, which causes its own problems because obviously people are moving around. So how do we do a project with that? So the next thing that I did is, the way that London Fire Brigade works is that we're split into 4 areas across the 33 boroughs. So we spoke to the borough commanders for each one, and using the mappings from the Canal and Research Trust, spoke to them, and we identified in the end 33 fire stations across 16 boroughs that would like to participate, and that had a need to participate because they had waterways and significant moorings. And we wanted to get a range of moorings. I don't just want we've got some very affluent areas with moorings. We also have some not so safe boats. We need a good cross-section of all of those to get some intelligent data for it. So once we did this, we were able to put in our grant to the Gas Safety Trust, to CO Research Trust. We were successful and got a large grant from CO Research Trust, and plus we had a contribution from LFB in terms of what we paid for. So the grant paid for loggers, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in detail. Loggers, we produced a video, we paid for a member of staff out of that, carbon monoxide alarms and literature to give to residents. Our contribution for this was that we provided smoke alarms, visit costs, so in terms of fire crews going out, how much does it cost for a fire crew to go and carry out that visit? And my time, so in terms of, it's been something that I've worked on for a number of years now, and I have a member of staff as well who, partly funded by London Fire Brigade, and during the time of the project is funded by CORT. So keep talking about talking about home fire safety visits. So we do home fire safety visits as part of our core business. They are typically to do with looking at fire risk. However, we've wanted to do tailored ones for this project. So we've got the visits to residential boats will include a tailored fire, carbon monoxide and water safety advice, loggers, the provision of loggers to the individuals, and the provision of CO and smoke alarms. There we go. We also have produced some literature. Rather than just telling people lots of things, we've put together a booklet on residential boat safety, and that covers all the things that I've just talked about: fire, carbon monoxide, and water. This has been something that we're using not just within the boat project itself, but it's been picked up by some other agencies. So the Port of London Authority recommends it to boat users who use the Thames and other bodies of water, so from Teddington Lock and around the canal system. As part of the project also, we, as I said, the premise behind the project is that we go in, we give the advice, we provide carbon monoxide alarms, but we need that data, we need some information, and as I talked about, trying to find out seasonal and so forth variations. So we will be providing each of the individuals with a carbon monoxide logger. It will log carbon monoxide levels for a period of 1 month. We also provide the individual with the facility to post it back. And then the loggers go directly to Julie, who you heard from before, go to Liverpool John Moores University, and they'll analyse the data, look at the variations, and we will, between us, we'll be looking at another set of data in terms of the individuals who were actually that we visited, and we can answer some of the other questions that I raised earlier. We also provided a number of guidance notes, which is for internal purposes, but might be useful elsewhere. We obviously, as a fire and rescue service, have lots of policies and guidance that needs to be in place, so we need to make sure that the advice we're giving and the way that we do it is done properly. We decided to do it in two strands because we want this project not just to end at the end of it. What we wanted to do was to make sure that we could sort of embed it further into core business with London Fire Brigade. So the remit for the project is to carry out visits for a period of 12 months to get as much data as we possibly can. We produced a training video that we use for our firefighters, and so that they have an idea of exactly what the risk, because obviously they're used to giving out advice, fire risk in particular, they're used to giving fire risk and carbon monoxide advice based on land-based properties. And obviously the risks are slightly different. We know different heating sources, we've got different we've got engines, you've got lots of different things that need to be considered. So we needed to put something together that we could use for our firefighters. I've got a number of agencies sort of supporting us and have been very useful in sort of collecting information to take the project forward. Sorry, I'm just about to drop this. Unfortunately, the project was on hold, so our due date to start was the 2nd of April 2020. So we had got everything printed, we had leaflets, we had posters, we had promotional material, we were all set to press go and do it. And then obviously creeping into March, going, oh, not sure that we're going to be able to do this, got to the middle of March, and obviously we all know what happened then. Which is a real shame because we'd spent a lot of time working on it. And the reason that it's still on hold is because we need 12 months worth of data. As I said before, we had a list of questions and we want to answer those thoroughly and to be able to give the information that we need. So we were due to start last year, and then the numbers all crept up again with COVID, and so we decided we had to put it on hold. We are hoping to start shortly. I've got a 2-month lead time really from the time I can press the button to us being able to deliver. As I say, we've got a number of fire stations and they have a number of other sort of things that they need to be doing. But that's the plan. So hopefully we will be starting shortly, and next time I'll be able to present some actual data for you rather than a plan of what we're going to do. So that is it really. The only thing I wanted to say was that in addition to that is I wanted to thank Tanika, who's not here today, but she's been my right arm woman in this project, persevering. So I just wanted to add that in. And of course the endless guidance that I've had from Adrian. Thank you for that. So, and that's
Thank you. So do we have any questions for Emma at all? Izzy?
Thank you. Emma, thank you so much. And I really feel your pain, I think, like the rest of the room, of your start date. Oh, gosh, what was the question? Sorry.
It's not been that long a day, has it, Izzy?
No. Do you envisage being able to start up again without too much issue? You don't feel that you've lost that sort of rapport that you perhaps were developing with the other fire brigades and their sort of rapport they had with the people, their boating communities?
I don't know if that's working. Is that working? Yeah. Yeah, that is one of the challenges. As I say, we talked to 33 borough commanders and 4 area managers within our own organisation. Most of them have now either retired or moved on to other positions. So the first step really, we've got buy-in, so the first step is just to go back out, and that's why the lead time, the longer we leave the project to restart, the longer the lead time will be, because I then have to go back out and do all the things that we did to start with in sort of information sessions and training sessions. We have to start all of that over again. So yeah, there has been an impact, definitely.
And do you, sorry, I'm sort of stealing another question quickly. I'm aware as well from sort of historical knowledge with the all-party parliamentary group, there was a report written on looking at behaviours, and I was just wondering whether you're going to in any way be able to capture some of the behaviours and maybe analyse it as a sort of study in the same way that the report looked at behaviours. I'm thinking of the sort of East, EAST, and the wheel. I can't remember the exact terminology, sorry.
Yeah, there was we took part in a pilot part that covered the northeast of London, looking at CO alarm usage. That was on land. I think trying to look at some of that data. We'll be doing 2 sets of analysis for data. I don't think I was very clear about that. One of them is the loggers and the information that's captured on those, which will go to Liverpool John Moores University, so to Julie. The other set of data that we've got a list of questions that we'll be asking residents. We've kept those 2 bits of data very separate, and there's a deliberate reason due to data sharing, GDPR, and so to try and do that, we will be looking at that information as well. So hopefully we'll be able to come out with some of the answers to the questions at the beginning.
That's great, and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Jill Jackson, Poison Service. It's just around the practicalities of the project. So you said you were going to run for a year.
Yeah.
So is that recruiting for a year and then each participant has a logger for a month? Or are they reissued subsequent loggers?
Okay, so the visits will carry out over a period of a year. The 1,400 visits will be spread across those, across that time period. With each fire station will be carrying out a certain number of visits within that time, within each month, and they'll be spread out throughout the year. So the resident themselves, the individual, will only have the logger for 1 month. And the reason we've chosen a month rather than any longer than that was because of the transient nature of the communities. There's already been some comments around whether we've had to do a disclaimer saying that we won't be using the GPS part of it. People in those communities, and I'm generalising here, but there's people who do not want to be tracked with the GPS. There's a reason that they might be living on a residential boat as opposed to living on land. So we decided on a month's period would be enough for us to get the data, but not too long that it felt as though we were tracking people.
Yeah. If I may, the GDPR element, is it the boat occupiers, do they sign up to it? Can they refuse to take part if they want to?
Yeah, so in terms of taking part in the project, we know that we'll be carrying out home fire safety visits, and the station will be identifying locations. We'll be putting up posters at moorings, but we'll also be doing communications through the Canal and River Trust to their members, and we'll be talking to them. That people can volunteer to take part in it, or when they're approached as part of a home fire safety visit, they can then decline to be part of it. So we know that we're not going to get every single person who's done it, and we also know that not all of those loggers are going to be returned to us. We factored that in because we know as a point of, it doesn't matter how many envelopes we provide with stamps and addresses and everything, they're not going to all come back to us. So we've sort of factored that into our costings.
And how much does one logger cost?
I believe the loggers that we're using, and I need to double check this because we bought them, because of the quantities we bought them, they're around £40.
Okay, any further questions here?
Just a very quick follow-up on that. What kind of levels will that logger
That,
measure? The loggers, what levels do they measure? And with what sort of certainty?
Yeah, so we are setting them at, I don't have that figure written down, the exact number. I can send it to you. Sorry, I don't have that in front of me. But I don't know if this is working now. What we are doing, we had the choice we're using a certain type of logger, and we had the choice of how often they recorded, and obviously the battery lasts for longer. The less frequently you collect the data, the longer it lasts. But we also don't want to. We need to try and catch those daily changes as well as the seasonal changes. Yeah, can you give it? I can't remember the.
So
sorry,
the
my brain.
loggers will typically go from 0 to 250 ppm, and
Yeah.
they're accurate to about plus or minus 1 ppm.
Thank you. That was what I was going to say.
There's a few out there. There's a few
Yeah.
out there. I won't plug them.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can say who it was, but yeah, they.
Okay, is there any further questions for the whole panel, if you want? No? Okay, I'd like to thank Hilary and Emma.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a slight change to the programme just because we're running a little bit early. So the panel members are going to come here, the chair, and we're going to open up discussion. So, are you chairing it, Adrian? Okay.
Can I just say how EDI, 50-50,
Yes.
males to females. Am I kicking off? Okay. So, we're going to have an opportunity of really summing up what's happened today and giving some bullet points of what we feel our reflections are as chairs. So, as I'm starting this off, as I've been volunteered by Izzy, thanks Izzy, I thought I'd look at my session. So my session, which was the first one this morning, was looking at one of the key aspects of court. And as you know, all 4 sessions covered the key aspects. And we were looking at improving diagnosis. I think what's important from this today, and I hope you all agree, is that we have considered the opportunities of considering the data that we can collect and the way in which we look at the types of biomarkers that we currently have. And that may be carboxyhemoglobin, it may be using breath analysis. And I think it's important that that information is there and we work to enhance that with looking at other biomarkers. Heather, Chris and Sean presented some fantastic data and looking at how we can take the clinical data and see what types of biomarkers are available to us. And I think those biomarkers are there to identify exposure to carbon monoxide. And what's been emphasised here today is low level. I think we need to be precise as we can on what we mean by low level. And for me, it's really important that we understand the difference between acute and chronic, low and high level. But I think what we came out with today is there are biomarkers that we're working on now and that will be very important in the future. I think the other side of this was that we should be able to work together. I think the work that Chris and Sean and Heather have presented shows that there are connections. And I suppose for me, I work on sort of connections and maps. And I think it is so important that we look at that. I'm not going to steal the thunder from my other 3 chairs, but again, if you look at today, what we have are the 4 key areas of court and what's been funded today, what's been funded. But each of those have got links, and everything that we've been discussing today links very clearly. I always talk about us working in silos, and that's not to be derogatory in any way at all. I think as researchers, we do tend to focus on the areas that we're working on. But I think what's important, and what's important of days like today, is bringing that together and actually considering what we're looking at. And I think that will come out tomorrow at the sandpit, and I think that's very important. I think the only other thing I want to really pick up on, it comes from Sharon's work presentation first thing this morning, is that in order for us to really understand this, it's important that we educate those around us, all the stakeholders, and that there's training. Again, we have to differentiate between education and training, and I think that's also very important. For me, as an educator, I do educate, but I also train, and you need to have that training and you need that upskilling, and we have to make sure that all stakeholders are present and able to see that. And the only other point I would raise is that funding. Court's been fantastic. I have to thank our trustees for supporting this new venture for us in doing this type of conference and the sandpit tomorrow. But I also think there are other opportunities with other funders coming together to support some of this other work, whether that's the clinical side or, for me, the non-clinical side. And I think at that point, I hope I've reflected clearly, Heather, Sean and Chris, your presentations today, and I'll pass over to my other colleagues. So I think it's Izzy next.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley. I've been taking copious notes all day, and I think that the volume of book that I have filled really stands out in terms of the research that's been presented, and it shows really for me that Court is a valuable and important funder. Very few presentations highlighted collaborative funding. Those that did, and that is excellent, and that is certainly moving us forward in terms of the research that we can undertake and the value of the research that comes out of it and engaging others. So I hope that tomorrow not only develops the ideas in terms of research itself, but also perhaps we think about the others that we can engage with in terms of funding, so that we don't necessarily leave it all down to Court and bleed them dry, because CO isn't going to go away anytime soon, and there are gaps. The recommendations that come out of the research that we've seen, I think ultimately they're going to develop guidance and policy for also, not just at a sort of governmental level, but for all the stakeholders involved. And it's also really apparent that there are so many people involved, and there has to be so many people involved, because CO affects not just the domestic environment, but also the work environment, the boating environment, the airplane environment. It affects the health service, it affects families, it affects the healthcare. It's everywhere, and so we can't. I think this is part of the problem that. So when I was working in government, we had, in terms of it didn't fall under the remit of any one government department, and that's why nobody really took an interest. They all did a little bit, but actually collectively that little bit showed that there was a problem, and that it was an important area that we needed to consider. I think in terms of gaps that were very obvious were the two presentations that didn't show any data. Hilary, I know that you're collecting data, but it does show that we're very behind in that area. That the Court has been able to fund work in pregnancy, and Hilary, that you've been able to develop this area from a standing start is really to be applauded, so that's great. Steve White, you are my other gap. And that, I think, very obviously shows us a direction in which we need to now progress some work. I know that Court has looked into funding some work in a neurological clinic, and we need to sort of press on with that and see where that takes us, so that we don't really get too behind. What's been quite evident is we've, to some extent, kept going along in parallel, so no area has got too far behind. But we need to keep that energy flowing, and we need to continue that sort of spark and those ideas running, so that we don't just trail off and become sort of lackadaisical in that area. We haven't talked much in terms of technology, other than Sean's presentation. That's quite exciting in terms of a diagnostic tool, but there was a lot of mention of alarms maybe not keeping up with what we need to use them for now in terms of what we're finding and our improvement in knowledge. Again, data. We have the potential to collect a lot of the data, or we do, but how is it coming together? Hilary mentioned a bit of data that had everybody gasping, but it's not, hasn't been officially collected. We need to ramp up that side of things. And really lastly, because I could obviously go on for ages, but I've drawn a line under my, my notes, the education and actually understanding what this means. I think from Heather's study and the work of the EDCO group, St George's has really developed a sort of an understanding of carbon monoxide poisoning. And I have a feeling that in the past, because especially with related to low-level exposure, we talk about exposure. We don't talk about poisoning. That seems to be left to the acute stage. And what's really quite evident in the work that we've seen today is that, yes, at the low levels, we are seeing a physiological response. But at those levels where we see symptoms, we need to probably change the way we talk about CO and actually call it poisoning when it is that headache and that nausea rather than exposure. I relate that to a sort of an advert which says, you know, only £899, when actually we know that £899 is a lot of money. It's that only that changes our perception. Perhaps we should change our perception regarding CO poisoning and leave exposure to the quieten down on that word to change that perception. And lastly, we are talking about people. We're not talking about just numbers, and it's people that are affected as well as the wider family, and we know that we're very into health and well-being at the moment, as it were, and carbon monoxide is something that certainly affects people's health and well-being for the long term. Thank you. Rob?
Thank you. I think I'll be a bit different, which is not unusual. Rather than focusing on my session, I have a touch of ADHD, so I'm just going to take more of a scattergun approach. I have to say that today has been brilliant from a scientific perspective. I mean, great speakers, very interesting information that we've heard today. I mean, if I was going to summarize things, I've got about 5 points. The most interesting thing for me was the fact that, you know, we talk about 4,000 people a year ended up in hospital because of carbon monoxide poisoning. It looks now that this is the tip of the iceberg, and it could be 100,000 people plus rather than the 4,000 that we've become accustomed to. So it really is quite a significant problem that we're dealing with. As Izzy's just mentioned, you know, when we think about carbon monoxide poisoning, you know, we think about people fainting and ended up in hospital and so forth. A lot of the historic studies have been done on comparatively heroic concentrations of carbon monoxide, you know, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 parts per million. We can see today from the data that there are effects at much, much lower exposure levels, and that's something that where we do need to do some more research, I think. That's job creation, Adrian, if you're here. Again, another surprise for me, you know, it's current accepted medical practice that if you've got somebody with carbon monoxide poisoning, you give them oxygen, either supplemental or hyperbaric. And from the sounds of it, this you know, could be contraindicated in the future. So that's an area of where we need to do some urgent work to really get to the bottom of that. From a toxicologist perspective, because I'm a toxicologist, but, you know, it's interesting to see the clear differences in the responsiveness of the different organs of the body, as well as known differences between different demographics. Something else which I've heard today tends to challenge the notion, you know, the old-fashioned approach, well, if you're not dead, you'll be fine. It's clear that, you know, there are some very long-lasting effects from carbon monoxide exposures. And we've heard today, in particular, mainly anecdotal evidence, but certainly something which needs to be picked up on is, you know, if you've had one, you know, hefty exposure, you know, this possibility that it might sensitize you to future exposures, that also needs to be addressed. And I think the one I'll be taking home today is from the last session. Sorry if I'm going to steal your thunder here a little bit, hopefully not. is that exposure to carbon monoxide is a bit like being pregnant. I always tell my students exposure to carbon monoxide is like having a hangover. So that's a new one for me to use in my future lectures.
Okay. Now, how do I follow that? So I think everybody said everything else, but I think for me the big taker for the day is, some people have mentioned about siloed mentalities for academia, but I think the one thing that we heard today is the opportunities of actually collaborating. So likes of Sean's device on there, but Chris's work as well, where you're exposing people to CO, will put those two together, and that's data that you wouldn't normally have. I know it's more complicated than that, the ethics and all that kind of stuff, but at least there's opportunities there. All the way through, I think we can pretty much from today categorically say that there is an absolute brain injury when you've got CO exposure. And that's the key thing. It was always be, it's anecdotal, and I think from my point of view, when I started this back in 2011, getting involved with CO, you hear these harrowing stories from the survivors and the charities and everything else, and all these anecdotal information, but now what we're hearing is the concrete evidence and data that backs and reinforces that, and slowly we're getting action. Yes, it's not going as fast as we want, but we're getting there, and I think that's one fantastic thing, and we're not on our own, as we've heard from Sharon, in terms of what's happening in the state side of it. And the more we collaborate and put together on our heads together, then we're going to come up with a solution. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I've got from today. And I think from what I've heard, although I'm an engineer, so I can't talk about the toxicology side of it, there's hope that there may be other biomarkers there. I know there may, because we had this discussion over lunch, didn't we, the specificity, but in terms of some enzymes that may be produced on their own, that may not be enough, but at least it gives you another marker, and not the carboxyhemoglobin that we've heard all the time. It's not a good proxy to demonstrate it. If we're telling pregnant women you're smoking when they're not, that's absolutely awful when you're hearing from Hillary. And I think the other thing that I'm, it starts on gathering the information on what the problems are. So we heard about Hillary's for the pregnant women, some of those in the vulnerable areas as well. We heard about the travelling community where all of the hard effort and work for years on raising awareness, it's not going to get to those communities. So now we're starting to look at those communities and learn from what we've got and put it forward, which I think is fantastic. Same with the boats with Emma's study. That's probably the biggest thing that I take from today. I think pretty much everybody said everything else, but I think it's been, I don't know what you feel, but I think it's been a really positive day. I think you can see some change. And it's the first time that I still feel as awake at the end of a day, even after all of those talks, and normally on a normal academic conference, because it's a good mix. And I think it's absolutely fabulous, and I think we should congratulate everybody for turning up here, because that's what's made the discussion so vibrant, basically, and everybody is here, wants to hear what we're saying, which is brilliant. So thank you.
So can I just, at the end, because we've got the sandpit tomorrow, I think what you've heard all through today and the summing up of the panel chairs, I think it is important that you looked at tomorrow at some of these areas and see if there is an opportunity of coming together. I think collaboration is important. I think at the end of the day, it is the influence of policy. And the other and last take-home message, and Andy's just said, it's not just networking amongst ourselves here in the UK, but networking with our colleagues over in the US and others. And I think that way we can also extend the opportunities of funding and the research. So that's, I think, the end of our conversation. I will just say, tomorrow we'll talk about poisoning and exposures. So that'll be something tomorrow we'll investigate. 2 toxicologists and Izzy.
What do you mean, and Izzy? Because I don't fit any box, I'm afraid.
Because we've got bookends. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to have the final word. I've 2 young daughters at home, so I don't get it there. So this really left for me is to say thank you to you all for coming. Thank you to Baroness Finlay, who's had to go, and our trustees for supporting us in doing this. Our chairs, Andy, Shirley, Izzy and Rob, for stepping in at the last minute and filling the gap whilst they put the bar together upstairs at the reception. I need to thank Corgi, who provide all of their profits to the CO Research Trust, and without their funding, none of this would be possible. I'd like to thank our speakers, especially Carol, for stepping in at the last minute, as sadly Beth was unwell and was unable to join us. And the other thing is, these things don't leap out of nowhere. We couldn't have done this without Natalie and Kimberly and Gerarda, who, well, Gerarda's not here at the back, but without them, this wouldn't have been as organised. Just to go back to the pregnancy project, I should just highlight that the gas distribution networks are co-funding that with us, providing the lion's share of the funding, and that's a good example of how we're working with other funders to be able to scale up a project, so thanks to you guys. The forms for the expression of interest stage of our grants process are now up on the website, I think. Excellent. And all that's left for me is to say thank you to you all for coming today, and if you'd like to join us upstairs for our drink reception, it's through the door, across the corridor and up the stairs, and I imagine I might lead you like Moses through the corridors. But thank you, everybody.
Yeah.